last year.
Yeah, we had a whole. Forgot we had yours. Oh, Richard won.
I was one.
Everyone please hands your seat. No one should be sitting on the stage unless you're running a video.
Till it falls.
Still have people standing up.
Yesterday marked the 17th anniversary. The 17th anniversary since God challenged humanity. Now, he didn't challenge all humanity. Instead, what he did is he found the most diverse city in the world. A city that is home to people from all over the world, all races, all religions, all socioeconomic classes. A pair of buildings which represented freedom and prosperity. Just a few hundred yards from an island where many of our great-grandparents came to this country for the first time in search of a brighter future. The future that you and I are living today. The challenge was, how are you going to act in the face of an attack by pure evil? What are you going to do? Are you going to turn on each other? Every man for himself? Anarchy? What I can tell you did happen was nothing short of what we refer to as chesed shel emes. Absolute, unconditional chesed. Regular, everyday people risking their lives, in many cases making the ultimate sacrifice for a stranger they never met. 135 countries lost citizens that day. If you can, for just a few minutes, turn to your right for a short tribute video of the events of September 11, 2001.
Apparently has crashed. It's something relatively devastating happening this morning. There is more and more fire and smoke. The plane has hit down to directly in the middle of one of the World Trade Center.
I forgot to move.
can only imagine these wild debates that must have been taking place that morning in the base in Shalmalach. Between Malach HaMakas and Machmisi Rachamim. Today, really? Him? Her? Like this? Now, of course, we'll never know why the verdict for some people was blank, and the verdict for others was the other one. We have with us today someone who, by all accounts, probably should not be here. But for whatever reason, Kadosh Baruch Hu decided that Klal Yisrael, our community, needed this individual more than they needed him in Shemayim. Since then, from Avi Fried, who I had the schus of meeting last year actually with a group of boys from Heichal HaTorah. Since then, he's been living a life of chesed, a life of community, and for me, is a real hero. Avi Fried.
Boy, I hope I can live up to those those expectations. It still gets me seeing that video, seeing the planes and the towers come down. So, 17 years ago, most of you, not all of you, but most of you in this room were probably not even born yet, or were just infants. So it's hard for you to imagine the events that unfolded September 11th, 2001. I was asked to come and retell my personal experience from that day, to show you, especially now, how even 1 second, just one moment, can change your entire world and your total attitude towards life. I couldn't imagine, even I couldn't imagine, what I was going to witness on that day. I had been to Israel before. I had seen soldiers with guns on the street. I had watched TV. I had seen wars go on in other countries like Iraq and places halfway around the world. But I never thought, I never fathomed that such an event could hit here at home to put my life and the ones I love at risk. I remember the day, September 11th, basically like it was yesterday, as it was yesterday. A beautiful Tuesday morning, wonderful weather, the birds were out, beautiful. And I had just gotten into my building on 1 Liberty Plaza next to the Twin Towers. I was heading up to my office located on the 47th floor, and the entire building began to shake. The elevator I was in stopped, the power went out, and the emergency lights started to go on. The doors slid open in between the floors, and not knowing what had happened, I assumed it was the largest earthquake in New York history. I was afraid the elevator would plummet to the ground, so I quickly made the choice and I slid out to the floor below, and I ran the 3 floors up to my office to see that everyone was okay and what we should do next. When I got to my office, the secretary informed me what had truly happened. It wasn't an earthquake, that a plane had hit 2 buildings over from our office. And I couldn't understand that. I couldn't believe that. I assumed maybe it was an accident, it was an engine malfunction, a bird strike, a pilot error, something of that nature. It never dawned on me that someone could do something so deliberate as to fly a plane into a building. I grabbed the phone and I called my wife, as I had been married just over a year at that point, and told her what had happened. I told her I was safe. I mentioned that Manhattan would be a mess that day, and being that it was her first day of law school, she had better leave early to make sure she gets there on time. And I hung up and was talking to my boss in San Francisco, and I felt another rumbling, and again the building began to shake. I turned and my secretary started to scream, people started to duck under their desk, and I turned just in time to see another large plane pass my window as if it were a car, maybe just across the street. Had it been any closer, I probably would have seen the gentleman in seat 21A as he went by. A couple of seconds later, I felt a thud as the plane entered the tower closer to our building, and a huge fireball, as you saw in the video, shot back towards us. I hit the floor and I braced for an impact, but thankfully the fire stopped before it hit our building. When I got up and I saw the huge gaping hole in a building next to us, I knew then that this was no error. This was no engine malfunction. I believe in coincidences, but this was no random occurrence. This was war. I frantically grabbed the phone to call my wife, tell her not to come into the city, but she had already left the apartment to go to school, and I didn't know what to do. I tried calling everyone I knew to confirm that they were safe. Most people I spoke to had already made the decision to flee Lower Manhattan, and they were all packing their stuff and leaving their office. As I contemplated running, I looked at the building next door on fire, and I watched as pieces of office furniture, copy machines, would fall out the window. And I worried I wouldn't get 2 blocks without a Xerox falling and hitting me in the head. So I stayed put, praying that my building wasn't the next to get hit. The things I saw over the next couple of hours completely changed my life and changed the way that I look at things in a way I had never imagined. For a while I sat and I watched in horror as people above the damage zone made the decision to jump to their deaths. A decision that I don't know, had I been in that situation, if I could even bring myself to make that kind of a decision. I wondered how bad things had to be for me to make such a decision. As I stood there contemplating what to do next and continuing to try and call my wife, a slow but growing rumble replaced the sounds of the people in my office that were crying or trying to call and reach their loved ones. I looked over and I saw the tower furthest from us, and I watched the building begin to crumble. Slowly at first, then faster and faster as it went down. I stood motionless in shock and just stared at an empty spot where one of the tallest buildings in the world had once stood. At that point, people all around me started to panic, started to run. The thought that the closer tower could go down next, that it could maybe hit our building, take us down with it, became a real threat. I got up and I got swept up in the chaos and ran for my life, bolting down the emergency stairs next to my office. And I can tell you, I've never run that fast in my life. When I reached the lobby, I joined hundreds of other people with the same thought of getting out, of fleeing, but it was too late. There was nowhere to go. The sky outside had turned from a beautiful blue day to pitch black. You couldn't see 2 feet outside the door, and things were still crashing and banging around as if it were a construction site in full operation. I didn't dare risk go out into that unknown for fear of getting hit with a piece of debris. I waited and waited until the black slowly turned to a darker gray, and the building manager went around distributing wet paper towels for people to cover their face, and I tried not to breathe in the growing cloud of dust. Slowly the gray began to settle down, and every now and again the door would open and people would run in seeking shelter from falling objects or bringing in injured people or worse. The marble floor, the white marble floor of my building, having just been shined that morning, went from a gleaming white to covered in ash, black, and blood. The grand entrance to my building began to look more like a war zone as more and more injured people and bodies were brought in. Among those injured was an Asian woman covered in ash from head to toe, and she had suffered an injury that severed her arm from the elbow down. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe my eyes as the man that brought her in placed her on the marble floor and then ran back out to get others. I didn't understand what was going on here. This was Manhattan, not Beirut. I stood watching this woman, not knowing if she was alive, what to do for her, and then she moaned in pain and rolled over. I couldn't believe this woman was still alive. It was insane to think what she had gone through. I grabbed my coworker and pointed her out to him and mentioned, we have to do something, we have to help. We ran over to her, we propped her up against the wall, and we started to apply pressure to her wounds. My coworker mentioned we should try and stop her bleeding. I took off my belt and I tried to tie it around what was left of her arm, tightening it and trying to stop her from bleeding out. The people came to me and we stayed with her as others were brought in. And when the building manager told us there was a Port Authority police officer here announcing we were evacuating the building for fear that the second tower would collapse and hit us, we motioned to the cop and explained this woman needed to be helped or she would surely die. He took one look at her and realized the severity of the situation, and he knew we had to act quickly. We scooped her up and helped her outside to an ambulance that had been brought just close to our building. It was then when I got outside that I could see the damage that had been done. I looked over and I saw piles of crushed and bent pillars where the first tower had once stood. And I looked up to see the second tower still smoking, still burning, and it seemed to sway slightly back and forth. I was momentarily distracted as we tried to get this injured woman on the stretcher and get her into an ambulance. And that's when I heard a noise that will haunt me until the day I die. I felt the ground below me begin to shake, and I felt a loud rumble coming from above. I looked up just in time to see the first floors of the South Tower begin to drop towards us. I screamed, I turned, and I tried to run, and I had just enough time to pray out to Hashem for his protection as pieces of the building rained around us. Everything went black, and I remember feeling something lift me up as if I was a feather and toss me around and knock me over what felt like a dozen times. Pain radiated through my body, and I hoped that if I was going to die here today, it would be quick and relatively as painless as could be. I lay there for what seemed like a lifetime, and I muttered the Shema with what I thought was my last breath. I hoped my loved ones would know that had I died, it was helping someone else, that my last moments on earth were filled helping another. The noise around the oxygen tank that was located inside the ambulance. The shriek I heard was a warning from the oxygen tank to those around that the levels of oxygen on the tank were too low. What I thought was just an annoying sound at first turned out to save my life, as rescuers heard the sound too, and they were able to locate us under the rubble. After about an hour or so, we heard sounds and movements above us, and then flashes of light as pieces of rubble were removed and air was exposed. Finally, I could make out a face, and a firefighter saw us and called out. He screamed for us to stay still, as if we had a choice. And as they did, I looked back to see the remains of what was left of the ambulance. It had been flattened like a pancake. One could have survived from in there. I felt terrible knowing that the woman I tried to help had perished anyhow. But I thank God for saving me and my coworker. When I was brought to the hospital, I was told later that I had 3 broken ribs, a shattered ankle, a torn rotator cuff, a bruised liver, concussion, a sprained wrist, and numerous lacerations and bruises beyond count. But I knew I was lucky. I was beyond lucky to be alive. My entire life had changed in a matter of just moments, and I was being given a wake-up call by the Almighty. Over 3,000 people died that day. Tens of thousands more injured. But God wasn't done with me yet. He had a purpose for me still. And while I can't begin to imagine what I did in life to be spared the way I was, I know now not to take life for granted. Every moment here can be our last. And at the end of our lives, do we really want to appear before our Maker and say we didn't have time to do it all or to do it right? I was spared by God that day, and I intend to keep my end of the bargain. I pledge to get more involved in my shul, to help others as much as I can, to learn more than I ever have, and to be a better person as a whole. In business, I am now a mentor for other Jewish entrepreneurs looking to make a parnasa. Here in shul, in this very building actually, in the Pressburger, I go to the Jewish Center. I am the Jewish Center of Teanet's Men's Club President, Security Committee Chair, and a member of the Welcoming Committee, the Kiddush Committee, and the Investment Committee. In 2010, my wife and I took over running of the Teanet Baby Gemach. Some of you, I know, have been to my house and helped us with it. It's a local organization here in Teaneck that supplies anything and everything baby-related to needy Jewish parents throughout Bergen County. And my wife are also deeply involved in other local charities, like Bikur Cholim, the Chevra Kadisha, and of course my children's local yeshivas. But even with all I'm doing now for Chesed, I still look around, especially now during these holiest of days, and I ask, could I have done more? Can I do more? Did I miss an opportunity? And is there someone else that I can help? Maybe it's guilt that others passed away that day and I didn't. Maybe it's sadness that our world as we know it can never be the same after that fateful day. Or maybe it's just me coming to the realization that the world doesn't revolve around me. Perhaps, just perhaps, there's a higher calling to all of us, a reason we were all put here on this earth. Maybe we're all meant to be better people. I urge you, not just during this week, not just during this time of reflection, but in general, in your daily lives, in your day-to-day dealings with yourself and with others, stop for a moment and think, what more can I do? Thank you for your time and listening to me today. I want to thank Rabbi Steckler and all the staff here at Heichal for allowing me to interrupt your learning this morning with this important lesson. If you would like to get more involved in Chesed opportunities, I'm happy to help guide you, and I know Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Steckler can certainly offer you more suggestions to steer you in the right directions. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Fried? Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Mr. Fried, for sharing your story with us. Thank you, Rabbi Kronenberg, for managing, and everyone have an easy rest of the fast.
Yeah, it was a live stream.